Hello and welcome to another episode of a Wicked Parley. Tonight we're going to be discussing whether or not the internet brings us all together or it brings us all apart.
Why or why not?
Why or why not indeed. Oh my gosh, I'm sure there's probably so many people who have thoughts about this particular thing, and so I do expect to likely see people in the chat talking about it. And so if you guys have questions, wanting to discuss anything, definitely let us know. And hello and welcome to the episode, host. It's good to see you back.
I mean, for me, I'd hope people would have something to say about it. We all kind of use it. We're using it right now.
Yeah, exactly. We're all using it right now. So clearly people do have things to say. I just want to kind of bring up the fact that we definitely have been practicing the current challenge of this particular month, and it's going pretty well. There's a couple of good stories, so look forward at the end of at the beginning, I guess, of next month. We'll fill you in on what happened during this crazy month. It's definitely pretty good. I think one of the main things that's important when talking about this particular thing is discussing kind of the key talking points in terms. And when you think about what we're going to be discussing, you have to consider the fact of what is communication, what is friendship, and how do we define the internet. Now, the internet might seem like a pretty obvious thing to define. It's like, hey, this is the electronic means by which we all communicate. But if you want to think about it better, it's more like the internet is a bunch of things. It's a spider web of a whole bunch of different ways of which we communicate through text message, phone calls, promoting messages online, creating videos for us to have commentary and whatnot.
The World Wide Web.
Yeah, the World Wide Web. And so when I want to define the internet is that I want to say that it is any electronic means by which communication takes place, whether it takes the form of an app like Twitter or Facebook or any one of the things you can just click on a smartphone, or if it's something that's on the web, which obviously all these things are connected on the web. But anything that's a form of communication, in my particular definition, is a form of the internet, regardless of like the exact means. As long as it's an electrical based device that is sending a piece of information, I count that as the internet in terms of the talking points to tonight. And Rose, do you have anything to say when it comes to definition? Do you have a different definition for the internet?
For me, it's somewhat similar in that it's sending information to and from devices. More like it's an object that kind of allows you to do that across any type of distance, whether that's as simple as from your house to your neighbors, or from your house to halfway across the world.
Yeah. The ultimate email message.
But yeah, so for me it's just an object that allows such data transfers, because for me the device being used is a little different than the internet, because the internet's also an app on those devices. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, but I mean, I think it's the implementation of what it does and how all the things are interconnected. And so, obviously, we can definitely agree that the internet is a difficult thing to pin down outside of just being it encompasses everything electronically when it comes to messages. And yes,
it's unless you want to be boring by somewhat pulling up the Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, we're not going to do that for this particular time.
For the other two.
Just for the other two, yes. And yes, host, everyone who is making stuff on the websites are definitely spiders, and we make great webs. For sure. Yes, so...
The pun.
Bum, bum, bum. All right, so what's the first definition we want to throw up when it comes to the ones that are Merriam-Websters?
Yeah, the first one we've got is actually communication.
Excellent.
So there's two main definitions, one of which is, there's my mouse, a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior. Don't try and get me on galactic speed, I still don't understand that.
And I just want to say that the first definition is the definition that makes the most sense for me when talking about this. However, if you want to use the other definition
so information communicated, information transmitted or conveyed, a verbal or written message. So it's this one's kind of there are two different ways of kind of saying similar things to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
This one's kind of more vague, though.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, I think a system of symbols is speaking to anything that is considered a written language. So, to me, you know, whether it be French, English, German, Dutch, Japanese, or whatever, those are all symbols that make sense. Okay, puns are crawling along your back. Okay, all right, host, that's a little creepy. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little creepy. Maybe tone it down.
All right, next one?
Sure, yeah, let's go to the next one.
The next one is dun 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 dun, friendship.
Friendship. You know, like the little rainbow. It's friendship.
The state of being friends, the quality or state of being friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting how they have an obsolete one.
Yeah. I think, honestly, number 2 makes the most sense to me. I mean, I think the quality of state of being friendly or friendliness makes the most sense for friendship in general.
At least for what we're about to talk about today, yeah.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you want to promote the idea of having a positive outlook when it comes to certain elements of things. And definitely when you're talking about friendship, it's the positive outlook that matters the most. So, yeah.
All right.
And so, yeah, we prepared well over a dozen particular talking points for tonight's episode. We'll see what we get to. Obviously, if we don't get to everything on our stuff, then we will, of course, you'll save it for the second episode at some point in the future. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and jump into them. Hopefully, you guys enjoy the conversation at hand, and of course, always. If you have any questions or comments to anything being said, we will happily address it in between. So, what is the first of the talking points?
All right. First one is, so before having done research for this episode, what were your original thoughts about whether the internet connected people or separated people in today's world?
Honestly, I think that because of my life experience, I kind of had a bit of a negative outlook when it comes to how the internet has been used, and so my thoughts were that the internet originally was kind of dividing us. It was forcing us to kind of be reclusive, trying to retreat into our respective worlds, making us a whole bunch of hermits. And that I felt like it didn't allow people to engage with others and allow them to explore many of the opportunities that I felt were constantly around people. And so it was creating kind of a really bad environment for a variety of individuals. But that's changed quite a bit. After doing a bit of research and discussing things with you and talking with other people, I kind of have changed my tune when it comes to that because I didn't take into consideration all the things that were potentially going on. And so it kind of, it completely changed my overall outlook on things. So, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of like what I would say before doing the research for the show.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me, my opinion's been pretty similar even with the research done, because for me, I've always considered the internet as a tool. It's just been how people use it, because I've had more positive experiences than I've had negative experiences, so I have a more positive outlook on this thing. Go figure. If you have more positive experiences, you have a positive version of it.
Shocking conclusion, I mean.
Oh, shocking.
Yeah, I know, right?
Anyway,
just absolutely shocking.
Like, for me, I met one of my best friends through the internet, but I have also had some people, try to make it negative. It hasn't worked so far.
What do you mean try to make it negative?
Scams, that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah.
So
That'll do it.
So as for connecting people or separating people, some people will use it to connect to others, especially for friend groups who have to move away, whether that be for school or work and stuff. And then some groups will try and separate people because of how easy it is to label or give someone a label, and then either quickly condone or condemn them. So it's not that the internet is really what's connecting or separating people for me. It's the people themselves that go onto the internet that try to separate or connect people. Wow, I did terrible on that.
It couldn't be as bad as me.
But yeah. So you said your opinion changed. Like how much did it change?
Oh my god, dramatically. Like I said, like I kind of had an extremely negative outlook, and the reason why was because I kind of had this notion of it being kind of, I don't want to say like it was just all bad, but I'd say that it was more heavily weighted towards negativity. And I kind of now kind of have a look at kind of similar to like how the gun approach is kind of like discussed, is that a gun is a tool. All right.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, a gun is a tool. And, when a person kills a person with a gun, it's not the gun killing the person, it's another person killing the gun. Killing the person. It's not killing the gun. Yes, that's exactly what it is. I kind of feel like anybody can do something negative when they're given something as powerful as the internet to manipulate. But it's on the person who is doing that to be able to do something good or do something bad with that. So I'd say that's kind of how my opinion has changed. It's just gone from, okay, we're just going to, look at it from purely utilitarian purpose, or are we going to look at it from a really negative standpoint? And I just decided, let's be as honest with ourselves as we possibly can and make the best decision we can that's trying not to be terribly biased. And I think that's what I think I kind of reached to, and I think I did it in a way that I'm comfortable with.
Okay.
I don't think I compromised any of my values in order to reach that conclusion.
Yeah. All right, that's good.
Yeah.
Glad to know it wasn't completely topsy-turvy.
Yeah. Me too.
All right, so now that we have our original thoughts out of the way,
yeah,
let's go global. How do you think the internet has affected those in underdeveloped countries?
I think that it has done a couple of interesting things. I think, like, if you take a look at like Africa, for instance, Africa is a place that quite literally just quantum leap jumped past a whole section of I would say, interactions when it comes to online content.
Could you explain that to me?
Sure. I mean, in essence, places like Africa essentially never got like what I would say like the bulky computers. Instead, they use primarily cell phones to access the internet and its various content. So their process by which they can approach things, technologically speaking, has kind of been sped up. And so as a consequence, they kind of have, I would say, an overload of information sometimes. I'm not going to say it's like too terribly, oh my gosh, but I would say that it's enough for the people who are in control of certain elements of their governments, for instance, to maybe not have the greatest handle on things just because there's so many things that are, new every day that they're going to have to continuously contend with that could potentially be problematic. And just the reason why I think that, like, you see kind of a lot of scammers come from that part of the world, which is not exactly super great, but at the same time, it also gives a lot of people access to information that they otherwise wouldn't have had. I mean, if you think about how a cell phone is something that goes in your pocket that has essentially almost all of humanity's, knowledge available to it, like the Library of Alexander times a million, And I think that particular aspect of the internet in places that, in underdeveloped countries especially, is incredibly valuable. Because, I mean, how many geniuses are probably in any one spot of the world? Well, if you increase the magnitude of how many people have access to that information, then that increases the number of people who potentially could do something with that kind of intelligence.
Yeah.
Rather than going to waste being some rice farmer or something like in the middle of nowhere where their talents weren't discovered. So, I mean, not to say that, being a rice farmer is a bad thing or nothing. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, if you're going to be able to have the skill to do something along those lines, I think it's better for everyone and for yourself to be able to explore who you really are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with the whole, that's a lot of information at once.
Yeah.
Especially if there are no real regulations on, like, what's actually true and what's misinformation.
Yeah,
because
also it, like, the internet, internet websites often teach a lot about how to speak different languages. And
Yeah.
so, like, do you imagine if, like, you had to learn how to speak English doing nothing but, like, watching random YouTube videos out of context?
I mean, that's going right into the deep end, but like,
Yeah, but I mean, eventually, like, once you once you understand a little bit of the language and you hang on to it, your growth is going to increase dramatically.
yeah. So it's definitely a way for people to get information that's not, you know, heavily. I need to rethink that.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, while you're rethinking that, host, when you say what about ASL, would you please be more specific as to what ASL is, like what you're trying to say? Because when you say ASL, there's like a couple different things that pop in my head, and I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So, and have you had a chance to formulate that thought?
It's pretty much they have access to information they wouldn't have had before because without the internet, they would have had to get news about the rest of the world through secondhand accounts or firsthand accounts from travelers and whatnot.
Yeah.
Or from local media sources, which could or could not be biased, depending on what the, if any, government in charge would be willing to tell them or unwilling to tell them. You know, propaganda and all that could be a thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. That definitely exists. That is definitely a big problem. So.
Yeah. So it's like, not only would they be able to search up information themselves, but they could.
Okay. So that's what. So it was what I was thinking.
Oh yeah. But if they, you know, cross-reference things, and with how many sources there are online, if they cross-reference, it's they'll be able to figure out what's truth and what's fake, as long as a bunch of people spouting the fake stuff isn't the majority.
Yeah, that's true. So American Sign Language is kind of not in my definition. I agree with you on that, but I also kind of would say that symbols of any kind, including hand gestures, do count in my particular idea, at least in the lexicon of how language is described. And so I would say that American Sign Language, although it is not directly mentioned, it could be inferred from our definition. So, at least to some extent. And when it comes to the first part, when we talk about what the internet really is, and also discussing communication, combining those two different definitions would probably get you to what we're trying to say. But at this point, I'll just acknowledge, hey, I do think that American Sign Language definitely does play a role when it comes to all aspects of the internet, yeah. So, okay, let's jump to the next particular question.
Yeah, sure. How do you believe the internet has affected people's mental health and well-being, and not just because of the pandemic?
Okay, all right. So I think
because holy cow, are we a bunch of hermits right now?
Yeah. I think the first thing that I would like to kind of point out is, because I think that what I'm going to say last is going to transition pretty well into our next talking point, is let's discuss how the pandemic has affected people's mental health first, and then I'll go to the more generic terms beyond that.
Yeah, sure.
And so this is kind of it'll be like a two-part question. So I'll finish one part and have you and respond and whatnot. So I think when it comes down to it, as we see increasing levels of depression and potential other issues, I think it's probably been kind of like a good thing, because at least it lets us have an outlet to be able to have some form of communication with the outside world during the pandemic. I think that it has been a kind of like a combination of good and bad, but mostly good in that particular aspect, because it at least allows us to feel connected. And humanity itself, if you take a look at our species in general, we're a social species. We thrive on communication. We need to be able to talk and interact with one another, and so this allows us to get that interaction without putting people's lives in danger. So I think that's kind of like what I would say about when it comes to the pandemic elements. I think that there are certainly negative connotations that happened because of the pandemic and how the internet was used, but I don't think that those are so great that they need to be discussed in this particular moment, unless people have questions about it.
Fair.
What about you? What are your thoughts on it?
For me, I'm typically a tiny hermit by choice. I get out of my room if people make plans with me. because otherwise I'm usually content just on the computer. But I have like two different sides of the entire thing because of the pandemic.
Sure.
One where a bunch of my friends were absolutely going stir crazy because they are commutes. Because they didn't need to commute and they literally could not go anywhere. They actually spent more time talking with the people they didn't have the time to talk to before, so they actually got closer. So I've got one group where it connected people that couldn't connect before, and then another group of people where they went stir crazy.
I see. Okay.
But that's like during pandemic.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what about without thinking of the pandemic?
Okay.
Before the influence of the demonetization virus.
Yeah. All right. So honestly, when it comes down to it, I think that you see a large number of people going in and seeing therapists and other clinicians for depression, for various eating disorders, and stress and anxiety. When it comes to being compared with comparing themselves with other people they find on the internet. You know, there are these personalities out there that are called influencers that I'm sure everyone is aware of. That, you know, they put on Instagram and Facebook and all their other social media, you know, things. This lavish lifestyle.
They put the best moments of their life.
Exactly, the best moments of life, and they're promoting it as this is how their life really is. And then you see all these people wanting to have these perfect bodies, have these expectations to have these perfect forms, and having all these high aspects of their life where every day is a vacation, every car is, you know, luxury car, and it's just unrealistic. And people have, you know, torn their lives apart trying to pursue something that isn't even real. And I think that is one of the big issues when it comes to how the internet is used today, is that it promotes and commercializes, I guess, you know, human identity, and because of that, it should be taken seriously, and there should be some level of responsibility with the people whom you know, put these kinds of messages out there. And I think that when a person puts out a message that can be so harmful that a person is willing to take their life because they don't drive a fancy car, or they can't shed those last 5 pounds, it's like that's a big deal. So at least
that's definitely difficult, since humans like to compare each other a lot. God, definitely does not help with all the filters that any app on the internet can provide.
Yeah, that's for sure. So I mean, like when it comes down to it, I mean, I'd like to know, for anybody who's watching, if they think that they've been influenced in a specific way by, you know, one of these people, and if they think that there's a negative connotation associated with it.
Granted, not all the time it's negative, I don't think.
Yeah, not all the time. I think sometimes it can be inspirational. I mean, like if you see like I don't know, like I'm on Twitter, I have The Rock, you know, his like, you know, feed, and so, like, you know, it kind of inspires me to go to the gym and eat right. And it's nice to see, like, you know, his interaction is with his family and whatnot, and he's kind of really nice and humble, and I just think that that's really neat. And like, that's something that kind of motivates me. So it's not that they're all bad. I'm just saying that, like, they can be used for
it can be, absolutely, which is but it's also a tool to help people find those similar to them, or going through similar situations that they may or may not be comfortable with talking to physical people about. Like if they can't find a therapist for one.
Yeah, I mean, that's an actual big problem in the United States, is that we have all these therapists, you know, supposedly, but it's like, where the hell were they when the pandemic? And the answer is that we found out that we actually don't have that many therapists. Like, yeah, it's
like, there's only so many people in the profession here.
Yeah, they're isolated. The truth is that there are, you know, there in some areas there are plenty of therapists. You could even make the statement, maybe there's too many therapists in one spot. But then there's vast portions of the country that have like one, like in 100-mile direction, there's one therapist. It's like, maybe.
Wonderful.
Yeah, maybe not the greatest thing in the world. So.
It's like, there are people too. They can't be stretched thin or they're not going to do the work they need to.
Well, I think the reality is that they're probably not. It's not even about like the stretched thin. I think it's just the sheer number of people. They just won't have the time to be able. There's not the time in the day to see the number of people who are having problems that need it. So. Yeah. Anyways, let's kind of jump to the next one since I don't see anyone saying anything in the chat.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Maybe later.
Maybe later. Yeah, and if you guys have something to say later, we'll happy to read it even if it's delayed.
Yeah. All right. So, what do you think are some of the pros and cons of having the internet available to so many people? Like, a lot.
Well, I think one of the big pros that we've kind of already touched upon is the whole fact that, knowledge is, fairly readily accessible. And I think that it's in itself is kind of like one of those really good things that kind of exists. I think one of the detracting elements, of course, has to do with the fact that there can be so much propaganda and it's very difficult to regulate something like the internet. And so, like, if something really bad happens that requires some sort of significant policy change, it takes a lot in order for any momentum to catch on to do anything that's meaningful.
Oh, yeah.
So I would say that's probably one of the bigger problems.
Don't get me started on the anonymity.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know about
Sometimes
trolls.
it's okay. Sometimes, a lot of the time, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think trolls are kind of obnoxious and a terrible thing. Although it might be fun to do, I think overall the consequences of doing something like that is probably nowhere near acceptable in my mind.
Like, there are some interactions I've had that are, like, absolutely fantastic, but the amount of people that can absolutely say something fundamentally crappy and then just hide behind a fake name or an anonymous labels, just like that's crappy, and I don't know why you think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the only reason why I can imagine that people having, some discretion is a good idea might just simply be the fact that, it's like they didn't want to have an internet police force. Because I don't think they realized that cybercrime would ever become the thing that it is. So.
Yeah. It's like there are some cases where anonymous works. Trolls, threats, especially death threats, and just saying something hateful are not any of them for me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Okay, it looks like host has a comment. It says some patients and therapists don't mix. Find a therapist that works well for that person. Yeah, absolutely. And could you imagine, being like living in some place like kind of like out in the I wouldn't say out in the boonies, but like out where there's not too many therapists, like Nebraska, for instance. And I'm not sure if this is still the case, but in 2015, there was a record of the number of active therapists that were in that particular part of the country. And I believe that there was one for every 150,000 people. So that would translate roughly into 2 therapists for every 150 miles in any direction. And can you imagine if you didn't get along with that therapist? Let's say you're a guy or a girl who cannot talk to the person of the opposite sex. You just aren't comfortable with it. It's not that you're a bad person. It wasn't that you just didn't mesh because you couldn't actually have the conversations you need because you're not comfortable, right? How shitty is that if you're in that situation and guess what? You're a guy and you're uncomfortable talking to a girl, and guess what? The only 2 therapists are girls. And I should also point this out too. That possibility is incredibly likely in the profession because women outnumber men 7-1.
Oh yeah, I remember that from the last episode.
Yeah, it's quite a large number of women. They dominate that particular profession, and I think it's probably because women are very empathetic. And I'm not saying that men aren't, but I mean, it's definitely something that women, more women who are empathetic than I know men who are empathetic. So,
but that's not about the internet.
Yeah,
that was something we covered last episode.
It's something about last time. So yeah, little tidbit from last time. Anyways.
Yeah. Back to it.
So yeah, what is the next one?
I mean, we're technically still on pros and cons. Like, I think we both just kind of mentioned cons.
Yeah, I mean, here's a pro outside of the information being available that we've kind of both hinted at. is I think that it opens up new horizons for people. It gives opportunities to people who otherwise wouldn't have opportunities for a variety of ways, not just exclusively for like work or like education, but just like being exposed to like certain like thoughts and trends that open up the different perspectives and getting a glimpse at other ways of life in the world. I mean, I, without the internet, would have no knowledge of Japan whatsoever, and I freaking love Japan. Like, Japanese culture is amazing. I love Japanese culture.
Open to a lot more job opportunities.
Yeah.
The amount of information you've got, the amount of people you can collaborate with nowadays.
Yeah.
Rather than just locally.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, like, as much as people hate online dating, it does, offer that too. I mean, if you're a person who likes online dating, then guess what? That's a pro. And if you're like me and I think online dating sucks, then I think then you would be a negative. So that one's kind of like your choice. Like a coloring book of good and bad. Paint with a wide brush.
Grab the Lilo clip from Lilo and Stitch. It's just, that little colorful painting. It's like, this is the bad. We want to be good.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I definitely like the amount of people and collaborations that you can kind of meet and chat with.
Yeah, and there's so many different like lived experiences that like, and just being able to get to know some people like and understand like their different way of being. I think it's really cool. Okay, so I think we're kind of good with the pros and cons at this point. Let's go ahead and move on to the next particular questions.
So, what do you think are some things that could be improved about the internet and the applications they provide?
I think one of the big things is something that I alluded to before about thinking that we probably need some form of regulation. That is not the type of regulation that was put forth previously. Because I really think that was a really bad thing. I don't think it was a good thing at all. So, I don't want to say this and be like, oh, this is a terrible idea, but I mean, it kind of is a terrible idea. Is that like, why would you think it would be necessary to have like a governing body? Probably sounds like a stupid question, if I'm being 1,000% about it. Just because it's like, in the history of regulation, when has regulation actually served like an actual good? And I think this might be one of those rare circumstances where it's like the one thing you think you don't want is actually the thing that you do want. And my reasoning behind this is that you have the dark web, where people can literally be bought and sold. You literally have drugs of all kinds being bought and sold, and there are people who like law enforcement that can sort of touch on this sometimes, but I think for the most part there's not enough being done. And the reason why we know this is because the fact of the matter is that someone has to go out of their way to do something really, really, really shitty in order to actually see consequences. Most of the time it's just kind of like, oh, we'll get to it if we can. Oh, we couldn't catch him, so I guess we're screwed, kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, that's not great.
Nah. Makes me more sad.
Yeah, I can see that.
Just me being sad about it?
Yeah, I definitely can see that. So.
Oh, finally we're out of that room.
I know, right? It's great.
Regulations, security, but the thing is, with the security, if you upgrade it, somebody's going to want to break through it later. It's the thing you see with ad blockers nowadays. Gosh darn it. Yeah,
the other thing that I think that might be helpful when it comes to the internet has to do with the way in which marketing happens.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I think that like we spend a lot of time doing certain things in a way that is not helpful for everyone. I think that it's kind of like a me first kind of like idea.
And what makes you say that?
Well, I think it has to do with the fact that like we have allowed a consumer culture to define us. I mean, that's kind of one of the main things that I look at. I mean, you don't get a commercial and go, awesome, I'm buying these shoes because they're comfortable. No, I'm buying the shoes because I'm empowered to buy these shoes. I'm compelled to wear these shoes because these shoes are what everyone says I should be wearing. And it's not about like them being good. It's them being, you know, they're selling it to you, which I know, I understand is it's consumerism. It's what you should expect. But at the same time, I kind of have this idea that it's gone too far.
It's kind of creepy sometimes how they get that data too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, you have your cell phone and maybe you're talking. You know, I don't know if you have like an Alexa at home or something like that. And if you talk to it, it'll record what you're saying. And so like, I've seen people who literally had like, they were talking about like some random food item, and then suddenly like their Alexa just suddenly like, you know, has an offer of coupons for the place that they were just talking about.
That happened when I was hanging out with my friends. We were trying to see if his own phone would listen to it.
Yeah.
So he put the phone to the side, and he just mentioned this one food item which he's never mentioned before, and we kept repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. Guess what decided to show up on his phone the next day?
An ad for that very food item.
Yeah, exactly. When he had never mentioned it before, never shopped for it, never. It was, hush.
Yeah, I'm not shocked. Not shocked in the slightest.
He's like, and people wonder why we have trust issues.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like, why you have a problem with this? I don't know. It's probably a really good reason. So.
All right. So, are there any apps that you think shouldn't have been created whatsoever?
You know, when we were first formulating this particular talking point, I definitely had a long list of apps. I definitely think I have rethought this in recent times when it comes to this particular thing. And I think the main ones that I think are bad, and this is going to sound silly, but like, you just bear with me on this.
Okay.
I think Facebook as a internet and as an application has done a lot of things to create problems that I don't really think is a good thing. That probably doesn't sound like it makes too much sense, does it? It's because obviously, because Facebook. Oh, all right. So Facebook essentially, you know, it allows us to have friends and connect things and all sorts of craziness, right? But in addition to that, in recent years, it has presented information like that has affected elections, which, you know, call it good or bad, whatever the hell you want to say about it. But what I would say personally about it is that I think that that was not its intended use, and the moment that something does something that it's not intended is the moment that it's probably not great. So that's at least my general thought about that.
Yeah.
So.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm just thinking about the whole, like, you've got your friends, and you've got your close friends, and then you have your Facebook friends.
Exactly, right. You have, like, it's like you have, I mean, like, does it count as a friendship if you've never met the person ever? I would say yes, because, like, the terms like we're using is that you're being friendly, okay? But I think there's a big difference between being friendly in friendship and not. And I think that the not happens way more often. So.
It's like, how do you it's like, I don't use Facebook too much anymore besides the Messenger app to talk with, like, a couple of close groups. But I've seen people with, like, over 200 Facebook friends, and I'm just looking at that like, how do you even remember them all? And they don't.
Yeah, they don't. They're just like, oh, it's like having followers. That's the other thing that I kind of like am not happy with.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I actually think that like things like Twitter, I think things like Instagram are also apps that I wish kind of didn't get made. And my reasoning for this is pretty straightforward. I think Twitter creates stress because it gives it allows for people to basically have completely nonsensical, bigot-ridden arguments with people, and it allows them to push their ideas and stresses on other people. And I think it creates a negative outlook that that fodders and caters towards this extremely negative expression that doesn't help anyone. I think it's just like it's like toxic hidden, and that's why I think it's kind of terrible. When it comes to Snapchat, I think it's simply the fact that Snapchat and Instagram both kind of push for this unrealistic thing that causes more damage than good. I think it's not what was intended, but I think just similar to the reason why I don't like Facebook is the same reason why I think Snapchat and Instagram are terrible. Now, I used to have a longer list, but that's really all they are, that when it comes down to it. And I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we use Twitter, like for here, and we use it to be able to convey ideas. I mean, the thing that I noticed is that we convey ideas, and yet no one interacts with our Twitter. Like we have questions, and we put it out there, and I think like maybe like once out of every like 30 questions of the day, we actually might get someone to respond. And it makes me like think that, if people aren't there to actually have a conversation, they just want to yell at people about random crap. It's like, okay, if that's what they're only going to use it for, or if that's the only expressions that are, being had, then that kind of is shitty. And I've heard other people, like other like hosts for various things, discuss the fact that like they had to take a Twitter break because it's like so stressful and so like toxic that they literally felt relieved by deleting the app and like not having to interact with people for X amount of time. So
you don't have Twitter, you barely have a Facebook. Hey, you might want to keep it that way sometimes.
It's okay, host. I don't expect you talk most of the time in the chat, so like it's fine.
I appreciate you.
I don't blame you for not having Twitter. And honestly, if it wasn't for the show, there wouldn't be a Twitter. I didn't have a Twitter before the show, and if the show ever ends, there won't be a Twitter after for me. So like that's.
I know I didn't use Twitter either. Some other of the staff members do, but like I didn't either.
Yeah, I think was it one of them uses it?
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyways. So that is pretty much it for what I think are things that shouldn't be there. Do you have any that are like glaring? They're like, this should be gone.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, and I have been thinking on it for a little bit, because it's like I can find like something good that happened because of every single one of my apps. So I can't really think of one that shouldn't have been created to begin with. As for apps that I think could be improved, I mean, that's pretty much why they're updated every once in a while, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I'm annoyed by a Windows update.
Yeah, that's more of a system.
Yeah, but it's still an application. And what is an app but an application?
Remember MySpace? Pepperidge Farms remembers? Oh my God.
Pepperidge Farms remembers. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, when it comes down to it, by the way, MySpace still exists.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, there's probably no one using it other than, like, weirdos. So, I mean, sorry for those who use MySpace. I'm sorry. Not sorry. Do you want to move on to the next question? I think we kind of beat this with a dead horse here.
Yeah, sure. So, how do you think interactions have changed between the past when the internet wasn't so widely available and now?
That is a good question. All right.
What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of.
Okay. It just depends.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this. Like, this is gonna sound like make me sound kind of old, but I grew up in like the mid to late 90s as a kid, and around that time period, the internet existed, but it wasn't like what it is today. And the thing that I remember, that maybe it was just based on the interactions I had. So I just want to like temper this a little bit by saying that maybe this isn't exactly 100% true.
Okay.
But it did seem like when people had interactions with one another, they cared about getting to know each other, and they were a bit more friendly. I feel like today's interactions, when you go to like a restaurant, you're seeing most people sitting at tables on their phone. And they're only bothering to talk to the people whom are at the table, and often they're not even making eye contact or looking at them. So unless they're like family members, you aren't really having the same kind of interaction that you might have had back then. And so I think that we've lost a little bit of that human contact that kind of was present before.
Oh yeah.
I would say that that's the biggest thing that I would say that is different, from before.
I can see it.
Well, what about you? Do you have anything that's like you can recall or have any slight, information to glean from this, or has the internet just always been part of there?
For me, the internet has kind of been a part of my life as far as I can remember. Like, when I interacted with people before I really readily used the internet, it was usually for school. Like, I was, I think, preschool, kindergarten type of scenario.
Yeah.
So it's not like I would have gone out and socialized a bunch anyway, and then by the time I was in elementary school, it was a lot of internet anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, I can't say anything about how different it is because I didn't experience it myself, but I can see why there might be a reason why the older generation doesn't like the internet as well, besides it being finicky and chock full of problems and complicated to use with everything nowadays.
Well, I will say this. I do remember a time when Blockbuster Video and other grocery stores would hand out
Hi, Matthew.
AOL like discs.
Wait, what?
Yeah, like they were like boot up discs
The heck are
to
those?
access like the internet browser, AOL.
Oh.
Yeah, like it was like you had like a disc, then that would give you the program that would give you access to use the internet.
Okay then.
Yeah, and hello, Matt. Good to see you. And so like that kind of that and that sounds kind of super silly, but like it's kind of real. Yeah, real about that. So. But yeah. Okay. Anyways, so let's go ahead and go into the next thing, huh?
Yeah. It's like, so, still on a relatively similar topic. Do you think that interactions between people have overall less substance and whatnot, or do you think there are occasions where interactions online have more impact over an in-person interaction?
Okay, so I kind of think this is a depends situation.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I think that if you know a person, right?
Yeah.
In like real life, and you interact with them, you've talked with them, you understand their mannerisms, you understand like the way in which they communicate, and you've seen how they write, and you can infer how they write. Then I think that the conversations you have substance, even if they're online, because the little subtleties that make up that particular individual, that is probably the thing that matters the most for communication, and you don't necessarily need to be in person as long as you have an understanding of each other. Now, if you are like the person who has 50 or 100 Facebook friends who's never met any of them, then it kind of is like, that's not substance. That's just kind of like the desire to have substance, but you lack it.
Especially if you don't know how they talk to begin with. The amount of tones that are lost in text is ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a person who uses a lot of inflections when I communicate. I do a lot of like wavy hands and gestures and whatnot that add to what I say, because often I stutter. And I know that probably doesn't surprise anybody here that I stutter, but yeah, it's something that often happens to me. And so when I communicate, if I was using like solely like text message and whatnot, I probably would come off like, oh, he sounds like a pretty good guy, pretty normal guy. And then they hear me for the first time, like, oh God. So, I don't know.
Oh my god. Yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Oh, what a post.
So.
Oh, gosh, I'm just thinking of like which interactions I've had that are decent, and then like, I mean, yeah, I prefer in-person conversations. But if I don't feel like people,
You don't feel like people, you don't feel like people. What are you gonna do?
yeah, you don't feel like people, you don't feel like people.
Yeah.
But overall, I do like the in-person interactions a bit better,
Yeah.
if only for hugs.
Yeah, hugs
I can
matter.
actually hug people.
Yes, hugs people matters. So I would definitely say that, like, that's my overall opinion when it comes to the substance thing, is that it is entirely dependent upon who has what and how they choose to interact. That's the big thing at the end of the day. So,
Yeah, understood.
yeah. All right. Cool. So let's move on to the next one, huh?
So this one's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Let's see. Well, actually, no, now that I looked at it, it's similar to what we were talking about.
Mhm.
In your opinion, what are some things that are fundamentally better in person than done online? And what are some things that might be the opposite?
Mhm.
Obviously, if we're talking about like current times now, pandemic still hit, so there are some things you just have to do in online for the safety of other people.
Mhm.
But like,
Yeah, I think that when it comes to that particular question, I think that there's a long list, first of all, of things that like, kind of can go for either one. But I think when it comes to online learning, I think that depending upon what you're learning, some things could be actually better on an online format than in an in-person class. Like an example of this is that anything that is going to be considered extremely tedious and boring, where you are literally not motivated to go to class, like it's a subject that you just absolutely detest. Well, if all you need to do is do the reading and homework and the lectures can be recorded, then you can ease the burden of taking that particular class by doing an activity that you actually enjoy. And I think that right there could potentially be a way of resolving one of the problems of doing that. And then, so that might be a good way of handling that. Versus the other situation, which could be, how do I say it? How do I put this? Which could be you just don't go to that class, or maybe or maybe you do really poorly because you just fall asleep in the class because it just doesn't hold your attention. So there's some things in that particular avenue that I can speak to from personal experience that I think definitely has merit. The other thing I think that happens when it comes to in-person, other than the things in which we've already kind of hinted at when it comes to just like, being able to, hug people and whatnot, has to do with the fact that I think some people just thrive on certain types of communication specifically. And when they are absent, and that's not a thing that they can actually do, then it kind of creates a huge problem for them. So it's definitely like the people who are like, I guess you would call them hermits to some extent. Those people aren't going to be affected that way. But if you're like a social butterfly and you're not able to fly, then that's a bad day for you,
That is a very bad day.
So I think that would be an example of a situation that I think kind of would be better, obviously in person. So, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much because we're running close to time on
this.
We
can go ahead and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
This one's like the question that I've been looking forward to.
Okay.
Mostly because it's actually one I've been asked before in my own classes.
Okay.
So, obviously, kind of. When the pandemic hit, we saw an increase in the use of online tools for businesses, schools, social media, blah, blah, blah. Now that it looks like lockdowns are slowly ending and mandates being put in place for the safety of people, depending on your area, do you think people will stay as connected online as before, or do you think this will lessen?
Well, I think that employers are definitely liking the idea of having people come back to the work. Because they have this perception that people are lazy and that they're not going to work. I think that idea is ridiculous. And, I hope that they kind of take a more leisurely approach to things, if that makes any sense. That they have the opportunities to kind of explore things. Because I think, having the ability to not go into say a job that is 100 plus miles away, where you're a super commuter of sorts and you're able to spend more time with your family. Maybe you go exercise, go hiking, etc. Get out in nature. These things are kind of like important to our economy in different ways, and so making sure that different areas of the economy have a chance to improve and get some much needed help, I think isn't a bad thing. I think that we're going to see schools, particularly colleges, probably see a very large increase in online participation versus not online, because of the simple nature that an online course is infinitely easier to manage than not, because you can completely create your schedule and work around whatever you want. And a lot of classes are asynchronous, which, for those who don't know what an asynchronous class is, you control when you do the course content within the purview of the time allotted by the professor. So that's kind of a good thing for some. I definitely think it's a good thing. But yeah. So, anyways, yeah. I think, I would say probably we're going to see an increase in desire for it. Whether or not we actually see it actually happen in all sectors, that like we saw with the pandemic, that's the part that I think probably not. If I'm going to be like honest about it, is that you probably won't see that happen, because I think there's a lot of businesses that just that they think that 100% that they're going to be wasted. They're going to waste their time. And I'm not sold that they're going to do that. So
yeah, they've followed their ways, and they only did what they did in the last year and a half, 2 years, because it was necessary to survive.
Yeah.
Now that things are slowly, in some areas, coming back, it's just like, no, we're going back to our old ways. Yeah, I can see it, especially for me. Just a small example is, since businesses are actually opening up again, you're going to have to start commuting again.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. And, hey, what a wonderful idea. We need to reduce our carbon emissions. Let's have people work from home instead of having to drive to work. Oh, wait a minute. That's the smart idea. Can't have that.
Can't have that now, can we?
Apparently not.
I remember the jokes when the pandemic hit, obviously. Just a quick thing. It was essentially, we were doing more for the environment staying at home than we had been for like the last decade.
Yeah, I think that it was kind of funny that you saw animal life return to some areas that you wouldn't normally see. I thought that was interesting to see that the air got better, like noticeably better. And that to me just kind of shows just how important all of this is. That, like, as much as people want to use like certain tools to do things right, I think we should consider using the tools that we have to make better decisions. So that way, if we're going to be in a situation where, okay, somebody needs, something specific, done, that they're able to do that in a way that doesn't cause anyone harm. And the best way to do that is use the internet. That's what I'm saying. Use the internet. So like let's put it that way. Let's make sure that we use the tool to connect us instead of causing it to separate us. Instead of using it for bad things. Instead of creating stresses that we all are aware of, and having people tell us, oh, you got to exercise and do this and this and this and this. Instead, let's use it appropriately, okay? And let's make the world a better place. What do you say, people? Is that something we can all agree to?
I can agree to it.
All right. I definitely will.
Let's do this.
I will agree to that as well, and I will, hopefully do the same thing. Is there anything last you want to say?
Keep connected with friends and family. They are very important to you.
Yes, stay connected.
Well,
people.
those that you're on good terms with, at least.
Yeah. Stay connected, and do your best to have a good rest of your evening. And I guess we will, we'll see you all in the next one. Good night, everybody. Later.